Hi, everybody. I'm Noreen Whysel. I'm here to talk about consumer views on respectful technology and all of the really great research that we've been doing out of the Me2B Alliance research team. I'm part of a product integrity testing initiative here at the Me2B Alliance, and I'm really excited to show you guys what we've been up to. So this is basically our reason for being in the research area. We're studying how people view their relationships with digital technology. And user-centered findings will inform how we describe these unique relationships in our education materials and outreach. So what we're going to talk about today is just generally how the Me2B Alliance sees relationships in the digital world, so that you can take a look at what the framework is and how we anticipate that people are reacting and understanding those relationships. The research practice at the Me2B Alliance is covering a lot of different kinds of research, primarily focused on that validation that what we are representing in the framework that we're creating actually matches the way that the people in the world understand their relationships with digital technology, which can include both products and services, and in any type of digital relationship, whether it is an online account with a bank, a product that you use, a Fitbit, for example, a device, your phone, your computer, and any other types of digital technologies that you might have a relationship with, and what other kind of relationships might be hidden under the hood, so to speak, and whether the users of those products understand what's there. We'll talk about how we get people to participate in panels, and then some of the publications that we have available for you to take a look at. So let's look at Me2B relationships in the digital world. This is kind of like how most customer engagement models look when you take a look at the user and the organization that's providing a service or a product. It's often very much a one-to-one, touch point oriented relationship across a period of time that starts with an awareness where the user or the individual has a need that they want to fulfill through some product. They will do some search in some venue or platform. They will find a product. They will get the product and pay for it or make some sort of exchange, which could include data. And then they will manage that relationship for the duration until they either continue using it happily ever after, or close an account and terminate a relationship with that product. But there are a lot of different layers to these relationships. It's not just that one-to-one touch point, and a lot of these layers are things that the individual user may not see. So there are these hidden affiliates with third-party integrations and software suppliers that are kind of underneath that understood relationship that you might have with your device or with your social media apps, for example. And one of the things that we're really trying to find to understand in the research practices, at what level are the people using the products aware of these relationships, and how do they describe their relationship with those different types of technologies and affiliates, as well as with the company that provides the product that they're using. So how do they understand these relationships typically? We've really been using this relationships lifecycle model to simplify the way that we believe that relationships with a product can kind of be mapped to a relationship with a real life person, in the non-digital world. So it kind of starts with that acquaintance, and there is a buildup. You're interested in a product. You find something that looks like it's going to solve a need that you have, and then you're going to enter into some kind of a commitment. We're calling it a marriage, or a commitment with that product that will continue until some sort of deterioration or elimination of the need for that product leads to the termination of the relationship with that product. And there are all sorts of things, as I said, going along. There's kind of a data layer where there's this a consent to use any information that you give to the online product that may or may not be remembered and recognized. But there are different levels of identification that happens in a pseudonymous way. And this can happen at any part of the relationship, even before you've signed up for an account. So these are kind of very complicated and a little bit murky, and we're trying to figure out how well people who use products understand this data layer and what's happening with their data before they even sign up to an account. So there are different steps that the user might understand, such as when you get that cookie acceptance notice when you go to a website, that is surfaced and the individual will see that. They may sign up for promotional communications, like getting a weekly email from a vendor or website, but not necessarily have an account at that website yet. Maybe they're not ready to buy a product from an online store, for example, but then they may at some point end up deciding that they want to create an account. So these are kind of the points in that life cycle where it's surfaced and people are actually performing an action. And the Me2B Alliance is taking a look at that relationship that we have with digital technology over time, and have come up with some rules of engagement to ensure that the products are being respectful to the user by not manipulating them. There's an element of freedom. There's a respect of boundaries, that you default to the most conservative behavior of a technology rather than defaulting to something that the user has to opt out of. That things are fair and that you are not, as a user, being exploited, especially when you are required to share certain kinds of data in order to use a product, that you're going to, as a business, communicate what is being agreed to in a very honest and clear way. So not too much legalese, that it's really understandable, that it's not willfully harming anyone. And we actually have been developing a digital harms dictionary at the Me2BA website, where we've come up with a lot of, insights around the types of digital harms that happen, which can include willful harms, dark patterns, and the like. And then finally, the accountability piece, where we really agree that we are accountable for our relationship with our customers, and that people that are using the products also have, some kind of, relationship, with us, and we're going to be fair in that problem-solving approach. So again, with the research questions that we're developing, we want to understand whether the people, just day-to-day people, understand and value the rules of engagement, and see that being respected in the products that they use. Me2B is developing a certification seal that is a way to for a product owner to assure their customers that they're getting a fair deal, that they're able to control and have some autonomy over the relationship, and that any data or information that's collected from the consumer is being held in a very secure manner. And these assurances are something that we're also testing as to whether having a seal that signifies that certification of the Me2B relationship ethos, whether these ideas are coming across through that that seal. So we've been also doing some studies with assurances. So let's look at some of the research that we've been doing. Just generally, continuous qualitative and quantitative testing is central to the way that the Me2B Alliance is framing our design process for our certification product. We see that as core and continuous testing with MEs who are the consumers. And MEs also map to a membership category at the Me2B Alliance. So if you're interested in that consumer side and would like to participate in research that we're doing, we welcome you to join us for those, for that continuous testing so that we can continue to build our product in a way that really maps well to the way that you and other digital product users like you are, approaching and understanding the relationship that you have with those technologies. So in 2020, we have been busy with a number of tests and research products. In the first quarter, we commissioned 2 qualitative testing studies, which included an ethnographic study around the understanding of how the relationships with digital products are understood by individuals. And we also were developing the certification mark and trying to get a sense of whether the fair deal, control and autonomy, and safety and security can be represented through a seal, and whether it's understood as something that will encourage a person to sign up for a product and enter into a relationship with a product, if it makes a difference to have that mark to indicate that you can be assured that your data is protected, and et cetera. And then in the second quarter, we continued with the certification mark ideation, leading to the mark that you'll see on our website, which I'll show shortly. I was brought in the third quarter and started doing validation testing. So now that we've got a lot of information around the language that people use in their relationships with technology and their understanding of things like digital harms, we can focus a little bit more and dig a little bit deeper into whether our lifecycle model that we've developed maps well to that that language that people have been using. And again, taking a look at certification marks and different ways of creating an icon for a certification mark, and what those elements of the icon can mean to people as they look at them. We looked at preference testing with a certification mark as well. And then in fourth quarter, continued validation testing. Again, another ethnographic study, which is essentially just interviews with a small group of people to talk about their relationships with their, their digital products that they use. Again, understanding what kinds of digital harms they might be noticing that may or may not be affecting the relationships that they have. And we're going to be doing some studies also in legal policies, which is ongoing into the first quarter of 2021, and the language that's being used in the way that the companies are defining these give and take relationships and how they're protecting privacy of the user. So our research process is like any other research process. We start with, asking questions like, what do we really want to know? And then we recruit participants who we feel are best able to answer that question. We conduct the test, analyze the findings, and then we apply the findings to things like language on the website, like questions that we ask in our product development. And then we iterate and we decide what else do we want to know. And then we publish the research and we start the next project. We use a number of testing methods, starting with literature review, when I was doing icon testing, I was digging pretty deeply into the history of iconography. There's some really interesting Department of Transportation studies from the 60s about how different signage for, road information, like your stop signs and your yield signs and things like that, are really fascinating. Because the idea being that you want something that's very, at a glance, understandable for what it is, what its meaning is. We did some pilot ethnographic studies, surveys using SurveyMonkey, interviews using interview panel, recruiting company, and preference testing, as well as early certification testing, which I'm not going to talk about in this presentation, but I'm working on developing a presentation where we can talk about that research. So let's talk about some of the research questions that we were asking about the relationship model. Do consumers know that they're in a relationship with technology? Do they actually think of it in terms of being a relationship, or is it just something that they use when they need? And anybody who's done any kind of study of digital technology knows that when you have something in your hand, your phone or your iPad, or you're touching it, it creates something that in our minds becomes like this friend, or it even becomes embodied. It becomes a part of ourselves. And we are finding that in our discussion, in our conversations with individuals, that they really do feel that they have a relationship with their phones, with their social media, and with a lot of different types of apps that they're using. They do feel that they're in a relationship with that app. Maybe not so much with the company itself, but definitely with that device. If they misplace it, they feel sad. If they, if you put your kid on a timeout, a digital timeout, they feel sad, they feel lonely. It's really an interesting, thing to see happening. Some other questions that we ask: how do you want to be treated by your technology products and service providers? And that understanding of it being a give and take, that I'm giving some of my data. I know that they're probably saving some of it. What are they saving? Have I agreed to allow them to save it? And how do I feel about that? And then also, from these conversations, we can pull out some language to see whether the language that we're using is actually resonating with the consumers. And if the people that we're interviewing use language that we hadn't thought of, we might try to take that language and incorporate it into both, our education materials, our website, and even in our iconography. So we're also, taking notes on that and, continuing that kind of research. For the Me2B Alliance seal, does our proposed certification seal resonate with the consumer? And how well do they associate that seal with those Me2B assurances, the fair deal, the control and autonomy, and the safety and security? And so we interview people who are digital product users, and we do surveys. So we're both doing surveys that can go out to a lot of people, and also talking to individual people. And some of the types of questions that we're asking, and some of the formats that we're asking, can take the form of things like structured solicitation, where you give them a stimulus, you ask them to look at it, to read it, to make a decision. In this case, a statement about the seal: I know I will be treated fairly when using this product. Is this something that is important to you or not important to you? We also use semantic differential analysis, where we gave a set of words from different extremes, so helpful to harmful, respectful to overbearing, friendly to scary, and gave them a number of icons to look at for potential certification seals, and ask them to rate them on whether this one is more scary than friendly, or whether this one is more respectful versus overbearing, and took some analysis of that. This slide is a little bit out of alignment, but this is a 5-second test. And that's basically where you show them one stimulus item, and then after 5 seconds, it goes away, and you try to get them to let you know what they recall about the image. Describe the image, what do you think it means? And then you take that information and look for language that you can use in your descriptions. And then a preference test. You give them all of the stimuli, all the different potential seals, and you say, which one do you like the best? And then you can analyze that. Our research participants are screened. They need to be digital technology users, but they should not work for a technology company. We're not looking for people who code for Amazon. We want people who, you know, are of all, you know, very balanced in terms of things like gender, ethnicity, location, although we're focusing in the United States. Places that aren't necessarily New York, Seattle, you know, really big technology centers, but places that are, you know, across the country. And then we engage panel recruitment services like SurveyMonkey and user interviews to help us to recruit. And we're also planning to engage you, people who are interested in the Me2B Alliance mission, in continuing qualitative and quantitative research studies. Participant panels, as I said, are a blend of people. We're trying to keep them in the adult range up to age 75. Our surveys have ranged from small studies where we're piloting an idea to larger studies. We've actually done a survey with close to 300 people. And we, when we're doing our interviews, we try to keep them into smaller groups, and we interview them one-on-one in groups as small as 6 to 9 people. So let's see some of the things that we've learned. So our first insights from our earlier studies were on explicit attitudes regarding the consumer-company relationship. And what we've learned is that people do perceive that they have a relationship with their product and service, but not necessarily with the company. Corporate behavior is usually not a factor in deciding whether to use a product or service. When you ask people, why did you want to use it? It's either because, you know, everybody that they know already uses it and recommends it, or they have to use it because it's something that they're using for work. So, you know, that's like the reason that they would use it. Some of the factors that drive their use of connected products are convenience, usefulness, and the ability to connect with friends and family. And these factors can override negative views that they have about a company. So they may feel, you know, Amazon, you know, is in control of everything now. You know, I don't want to have to give my money to Amazon, but it turns out even the little mom and pop shops are using Amazon. So I feel like, you know, I'm going to just go ahead and use it because it's convenient to me, and that's more important. And we even found that safety and security are not things that necessarily override those concerns. And we continue to gather research in our subsequent studies to determine these patterns and see whether these can be generalized over a larger population. In looking at digital harms, people's perception of digital harms as an index of implicit attitudes regarding the consumer relationship. People do not know what the rules are of online transactions because they are unstable over time and they vary across organizations and they're not standardized. The relationships that people develop with their online services don't map so well to offline transactions. In an offline transaction, the rules of engagement are pretty understandable. You're looking at somebody in the eye, you're touching and examining the product. So that was an interesting finding. And unfortunately, this lack of mutual understanding, the kind of blurriness, the difficulty of reading those terms of services, that can cause consumers to feel very powerless. So let's talk about their relationships. Again, here's the relationship lifecycle model that we present to people in the interview. We don't actually show them this slide, but we do describe it, or we ask them to describe their relationship before we introduce this lifecycle model, just to kind of, hear their language first and then give them some language. Generally, they don't say that they're married to a product. Some will, but usually they just say they've got an account. And that's where the perspective is. There isn't a lot of perspective before. There's a little bit of perspective afterwards, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Some really interesting insights that we got from individuals that we interviewed, especially the younger ones, generally may not even remember how they started their relationship with a product. This one individual, a 23-year-old, said that he thinks his mom opened his Amazon account for him, and he uses it every day, and he can't think of why he would not use it anymore. Other people would say, yeah, I remember opening it, I would log in. I would open up the website and I would, do a guest purchase. And, if it was something that I didn't think that I would use a lot, but over time I might realize that I'm going to use it a lot, and I want the convenience of having an account so that it can remember things like where my address is, what, my credit card information is, and so on. Digital technology users don't really understand what's happening to that data layer. They do know that they're sharing data, particularly with free accounts like social media, but also with merchant accounts such as an online store. They can describe that things are happening with their data, but they can't really describe it in a very precise way. Some of them have a little bit more experience and understanding because maybe they've had a identity theft issue happen, or maybe they've had, a struggle with somebody changing their password, and having to get the password back and that kind of thing. The relationship that they have with the technology, they understand that it's there, but that it also feels very unbalanced. And that leads to kind of a sense that they don't have a control over the relationship. And they've also made that, the way that they describe their relationship maps pretty well with the way that we've mapped it out in our life cycle model. So that was a really nice thing to see. Another person that we interviewed was talking about how much in love she is with her Peloton bike. But she is upset that the app costs more for somebody who has the bike than for somebody who's just, using the app. And she's angry about it. So she's angry at the company, but she loves the bike. And it almost is like a different relationship that she has with the product itself versus the company. Another thing that we asked people about are their understanding of digital harms. This was a phrase or a set of words that they hadn't really thought of before or hadn't heard of before. And it's a way that we're describing the things that companies might do that are not good, that they shouldn't be doing, that aren't respectful. So some of the things that we learned is that people will often resort to risky behaviors in using digital products. If they're not really thinking about what might happen with their data, not paying attention to it, it doesn't bother them, out of sight, out of mind. But when something bad does happen, they will post on social media. They will complain, they'll call them out. But often, and when we introduce the idea of, when something bad happens in your relationship with your technology, describe what happens. Invariably, they will say, oh, there was a time when somebody hacked my account, or there was a time when there was a breach and I got a notification that was very official. And it always was framed in a way that was outside of the company's control, and not the company itself. So I thought that was interesting. We thought that was interesting, that the digital harm wasn't something that they necessarily saw as things like dark patterns, like, companies that will add stuff to your shopping cart, or make things, easy to click on when you don't want to click on them. That wasn't really what they were thinking of. They were really thinking more of these outside third-party things. What are some of the insights on the assurances? Again, the assurances, does the certification indicate that you're getting a fair deal, that you have control, that you can trust the product to take care of your data in a respectful way. So consumers expect their data is going to be used, and they will never fully trust an online product, they've said, because they don't really know what's going on. They do feel that they can get a fair deal if they pay for the product, and the value was not quite as obvious to them for free products. It was a little bit murky, and generally they valued it more if it was more convenient. So if there were personalized content, if they had information that made doing a transaction more quick, that was something that they valued. So those were kinds of the conversations that came into when we were talking about fair deal. They don't really think about control too much. They don't really think about control in the sense that they have control over the information that they provide to the consumers. It was really more about, I can control, whether the product can access my phone location, whether it can access my photos, whether I can turn the brightness on or down, whether I can decide, who in the social media world is able to see my social media page. So more really about functionality than agency. And they were open to the idea of a certification, a seal, a mark on a product as indication that the product was trustworthy. But no one said that they wouldn't use a product if it didn't have a seal. So it was like kind of a nice to have, a good to have, but not necessarily something that they that would cause them to not use a product if it's not there. We have done a lot of iconography studies as both a way to elicit some language, and also as a way to make sure that the icons that we're using in the certification, most importantly, whether the shapes and the meaning of an icon represents what we hope it represents in the product users. So icons are a visual language. This is the current Me2B certification seal. If I were to ask you what you saw when you looked at that, you might say something like, I see a shield, I see a person who's driving a car, or maybe a go-kart, or maybe it's a ship's wheel on a boat. I see the Me2B text, I see the word certified. It looks like it's a seal. They may go on and talk about whether the shield means that I can trust it, whether the person in the car means that I feel like I have control. So those are kind of the the things that we're trying to get people to discuss in this really open kind of elicitation of what they see when they look at these icons. In our pre-testing, we actually made up a couple of additional certification marks that we could potentially use. And what we asked them was to look at these marks, and we showed them one at a time, and we asked them, what are the main elements that you can recall? This is the 5-second test. So they look at it for 5 seconds and then it goes away. What do you think the purpose is of that image? Who do you think is the intended audience? As similar as these icons look to one another, it's interesting that the audience was different for different versions of the certification mark. And then just generally 3 words that come to mind when you think about the way that digital products handle personal identity data, for example. And then that's a way that we can gather language that people are using around the idea of a certified product for respectful technology. And some of the terms that we came up with, again, this is looks like it got misaligned here, but we were looking for terms that we could add to a semantic differential analysis where we show them the image again in a later study. We showed them the images again, and we asked them, on a scale between anxious and calm, how does this image make you feel? On a scale between opaque and clear, how opaque or how clear do you see this image to be? And then some of the terms that were elicited out of the earlier study, like clear and strong, we found were better suited for a Likert analysis. And you've all done Likert. If you don't know what that is, that's like this image is clear. I strongly agree. I agree. I neither agree or disagree. I disagree and I strongly disagree. We asked a number of questions about the icons, how clear, how strong, how trustworthy, things like that. And some of the analysis that we did here in the icon preference test, you'll notice that the band of positive and negative is very close to neutral. There weren't a lot of really strong positives or negatives across any of these. But if you look in the data, you can see that there might be some, preferences happening. In the preference analysis, we found that certain icons were stronger than others. There was something about that openness in this circle with the check mark that was favored among the people who did the study. And the current shield that we have is one of those open shields, and that was also seemed to have a bit of a preference. We asked about the icons and whether we can come up with an icon that would represent those individual assurances. So that would represent fair deal, control and autonomy, safety and stewardship. So we presented them individually with just these 2 on the top for fair deal and had them describe those icons and then tell us which one do you think represents fair deal without having told them. They don't see the assurances, they just see the icons. We get them to do what we did before, describe what you see, describe what you think it means, and we got some ideas. So for fair deal, the scales represented fairness, justice, balance, and control. The handshake also had a bit of the fairness and justice, but was more really about cooperation and agreement. And somebody did say the word fair trade without being prompted with the fair deal assurance. These 2 icons that were selected to test control and autonomy were a little incoherent. It wasn't really seen as control. It was really more seen as I'm fixing something, I'm changing my settings, or I'm asking for help. And then the two icons that we presented for safety and stewardship included what people were calling a business card or an ID or a driver's license, which doesn't really seem to say safety, security, stewardship. And then also the same icon with a pair of hands over it, which actually started to get some of that language that we were looking for. We've got you covered. This is safe. Although one person did say that it seemed a little muddy, and it's not by any means a finalized icon. So I can understand where people might feel like it's a little bit muddy, a little bit trying to say more than it is. But in the end, that was actually the preferred icon for safety and stewardship. The scales of justice were preferred for the two. In control and autonomy, the wrench with the little ratchet thing on the outside, the gear on the outside, was preferred. But in terms of control and autonomy, it wasn't really that coherent that that's what it means, that's what these icons mean. Whereas the two icons for fair deal and at least this icon with the hands for safety and security were actually, stewardship, were actually understood as being connected to that assurance. And just looking through the terms that people used for their favored icons, human, safe, and in control were the words that kind of bubbled up. It's something that we want to, because we feel like we're in a relationship with our technology, it's something that we want to understand and see as human. So having these human figures is important. We did have a lot of people who were pretty strong in their preference for the handshake because it had that human element. And they even said, is there a way to, put the handshake in the scales? And I was like, we're going to end up with something muddy, but, kept that to myself. What were some of the recommendations that came out of this study? And of course, we're not done. We've got a lot of questions that we still want to explore. But in terms of the relationship, the language and the iconography of that relationship concept needs to be centered around the Me2B commitments. So that's that Me2B marriage. When you're exploring a relationship with a technology, when you're signing up for that technology, when you're using that technology, and what is going to cause you to that relationship to deteriorate. The language that we use at the Me2B Alliance should reflect the human aspects of these artifacts of that life cycle that are created during the Me2B life cycle, and also the emotions around them, such as ease of use, ease of mind, comfort, and trust. And we have a lot more to study about the iconography of the commitment metaphor, and making sure that that's something that people connect to in their discussions of their use of technology. In terms of digital harm, it's not necessarily understood as a deliberate act against a person by a technology specifically. And that's something that might need a little bit more education of the consumer. In particular, the idea that the features of a service that are intended to make their lives easier might also be sharing more about them that they would otherwise not like to have out there. That didn't necessarily connect. And so finding a way to educate consumers in connecting the fact that there is give and take, that even if it's free, the technology may be using some of your data, and you should know how that data is being used. And then the educational tools should be created and expanded to help to expose those trade-offs that people are making for that ease, for that enjoyment that they have with the digital technology. In terms of the icons, they should relate to one another within a commitment metaphor. to help reinforce what those concepts mean in the Me2B relationship. We had some people who said that things like the police, the badges, the locks, it feels like it's a penalty. It's like jail, and they were afraid of them. They were scary images, and they really wanted to connect on a human level. So that was more important than this kind of overly penal imagery versus this, human to human connection. Illustrations that tell a story might be more approachable, and the current certification with the driver in charge of their own, data, that kind of tells a story, but we still need to do a little bit more research on that to confirm it and to ensure that we're using the language that makes those symbols understandable. So we do have some published research. You can look at it on our website. The abstracts are available for a couple of the ethnographic studies that we've done, and then there's also a full report that was done on the consumer supplier engagement framework. So you can go to the Me2B.org, I'm sorry, Me2BA.org library, and those research reports are available. If you are a Me2B Alliance member, you will be able to access the full reports. And we're going to be adding additional reports that we've done over the last half of last year shortly. So please look for that. And what's next? As I said before, we have started doing some research in legal policies and how well the consumers understand what they are and what happens when they accept them, and the privacy policies in terms of use. We're going to do continuous validation testing. We plan to publish about 4 research papers per year and do these webinars, hopefully on a quarterly basis. I'm still talking with Lisa about exactly what that schedule is going to look like, but we'll work toward getting more of these presentations out to you. And then also trying to get the word out in industry conferences throughout the year. So look for announcements for where we're going to be talking in 2021, and talk to us. Let us know if you'd like to participate in any of this research yourself. We're always looking for new people to interview about your relationship with your technologies. Thanks.